nature, right? May not be considered as appropriate. Fallacies of weak induction, the second category of informal fallacies, fallacy of weak induction, is occurred not because the premises are irrelevant, the premises are relevant in the second category, but the premises are weak, as the name implies, fallacies of weak induction. They are all inductive arguments, and the premises are weak. They're not strong enough to support the conclusion. The fallacy of weak induction differs from the fallacy of relevance in that their weakness, their flaw lies not in having logically irrelevant premise, as is the case with the eighth fallacy of relevance, and it's the problem with the weak induction lies in its insufficiency of the connection between the premise and the conclusion, which is not strong enough to adequately support the conclusion, right? In the fallacy of relevance, the problems lies what? Where? The problem lies in the insufficiency, weakness of the premise. The premises are relevant, logically relevant, but they are insufficient or inadequate to support the conclusion, right? Appeal to unqualified authority, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, false cause, slippery slope, and weak analogy. They are all can be categorized under the second category of fallacy of relevance. Appeal to unqualified authority is related to an argument based on authority. What condition must be made for argument based on authority to be accepted as good inductive argument? Can you recall our discussion in the first chapter? Argument based on authority can be accepted as good inductive argument when certain preconditions are met. What condition must be made? Argument based on authority to be accepted as good inductive argument. What condition must be made? The authority must be reliable, credible. What else? The authority must be the required expertise. Expertise, or the authority must be a person with specialized knowledge of the subject in question. And the authority must have what? Motive or intention. Not to deceive others or not to spread misinformation. Right? These three conditions must be considered when taking argument based on authority to be accepted as good inductive argument. If either one of these conditions is missed, then argument appeal to unqualified authority is occurred. Lack of ability. The person may not possess necessary expertise or knowledge, or he may lack trustworthiness. He may have the ability, but may lack the second conditions, trustworthiness or credibility. The individual may have a history of being dishonest, unreliable, or having a questionable track record, making their statements or claims less credible. Motive to disseminate misinformation for purpose of personal agenda. The person may have a hidden agenda, personal bias, or vested interest that could influence their testimony or information, leading them to provide inaccurate, misleading statement. Now look at this example. Imagine a popular actor named Alex is promoting a new diet plan on social media. Alex claims to have achieved remarkable weight loss results by following his diet and encouraging their followers to try it as well. This is typically unqualified authority because the subject in question is about nutrition, and whereas the authority mentioned is what? He's an actor, right? Do not have anything at all with the subject in question, right? The argument is violating the first condition, lack of ability or lack of knowledge, lack of expertise or lack of qualifications. And whereas in certain examples, appeal to unqualified authority occur, not because the person lacks the required ability, but because the person might have the intention to disseminate misinformation. He or she might have the intention to perpetuate his or her personal agenda, biased opinions, right? So you need to be what? Approach the matter from two different angles, from expertise as well as from credibility or from the intention or motivation of the person. Imagine a person named Sarah is engaged in discussion about childhood vaccination. Sarah argues the Surgeon General has stated that babies should receive the MMR vaccine. Therefore, it's unquestionable that babies should receive the MMR vaccine. Of course, the Surgeon General is directly relevant to the vaccination or etc. But the argument is somehow questionable. It's unquestionable. It's somehow very open for critical scrutiny, right? The person might have what? Bias. The person might have personal agenda or personal opinion in why he or she asserting some particular assertion or claim, right? Unqualified authority occurs when the intention of the person, the intention or motivation of the person is to disseminate misinformation or to in favor of one's personal agenda other than the logic at hand. The logic at hand. So you need to be credibility, trustworthiness, one's personal record, past history, and required ability and qualification must be taken into consideration, right? Appeal to ignorance or argumentum ad ignorantium, also known as occurs when the argument premise state that something has not been proven or unknown, but the conclusion asserts the definite claim about that thing, right? The premise asserts that nothing has been proven or disproved, but the conclusion asserts as if it's proved or disproved, right? It has its own exception, and the court's procedure, presumption of innocence until proven guilt, is a direct exception to appeal to ignorance fallacy. Throughout history, despite numerous attempts, no scientific evidence has been presented to prove the existence of reincarnation. Therefore, it's reasonable to conclude that reincarnation does not exist. Or it's reasonable to conclude that reincarnation does exist. They're what? Equally fallacious, because the premise asserts that nothing has been known, nothing has been proven or disproved, but the conclusion asserts as if it's known. Right? You can see a kind of clear contradiction between what the statement that the premise state and what the conclusion assert, right? In this example, the fallacy of appeal to ignorance is committed because the lack of evidence for reincarnation is used as a basis to assert that reincarnation does not happen. The argument assumes that the absence of proof equates to the negation of the claim. The lack of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Lack of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Right? But appeal to ignorance occurred because it equates lack of evidence with evidence of absence. The most rational, appropriate approach must be to suspend one's conclusion, not asserting as if it exists or as if it does not exist, but to suspend from asserting about it. But we do have certain exceptions in the courts of in the context of courts of law. Presumption of innocence until proven guilt is an exception to the appeal to ignorance fallacy. According to this legal principle, a defendant is considered innocent until the prosecutor presents sufficient evidence to prove their guilt beyond reasonable doubt, right? The person may commit the crimes that he or she being committed, but the lawyer may consider the defendant as guilty even though he or she commit the crime that he is committed, right? This is a direct exception to appeal to ignorance fallacy. The premise asserts as if nothing has been proved, but the conclusion asserts as if it is directly proven, as it's directly proven, right? Hasty generalization is also known as converse accidents. Accidents proceed from general rule to specific case, whereas hasty generalization is what? From a specific case to general rule. Inductive, it's a type of inductive generalization. What condition must be met for inductive generalization to be accepted as good inductive argument? Inductive generalization can be considered as good inductive arguments if and only if what? Kasaun? Other Kasaun? Yes. Kasaun Shagao. Yes. What condition must be met for inductive generalization to be accepted as good inductive argument? Evidence. Inductive generalizations, it's a kind of inductive argument in which the conclusion is based on what? Investigation of certain sample, isn't it? The conclusion is based on investigation of certain sample. For an argument based on inductive generalization to be accepted as good inductive argument, conditions such as what? The sample must be representative of the whole group. Sample must be representative. First condition. And the sample must be what? Big enough to support the entire population. Sample must be representative. Sample must be as big as possible to represent the entire population. Look at the example. In order to determine the belief of most Americans regarding God, a survey was conducted among over 10,000 scientists at colleges and universities across America. Less than 40% of the scientists surveyed reported believing in God. From this, it's concluded that most Americans no longer believe in God. This is typical what? Hasty generalization. Why? Because the sample is not representative of the general population of America. The sample is taken only from universities and colleges. That is very limited sample to, it is biased and not representative of the entire population. The survey was conducted exclusively among the scientists who may hold different beliefs compared to the general population. In the second example, the sample is small, very small sample, right? Over the past 6 months, I have hired 3 individuals from India, and all 3 have been found to be lazy and dishonest. Therefore, all Indian people are lazy and dishonest. It's typically what? Hasty generalization, very unrepresentative, fairly small sample size, not representative of the whole population, right? So 2 conditions must be made. The sample must be representative, randomly selected. It must be big enough to represent the entire population. False cause, as the name implies, the fallacy of false cause occurs when causal connection between the premise and the conclusion is assumed, even though there is no substantial evidence to support it. It has 3 versions. The first version of false cause fallacy is post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's a Latin term which means after this, therefore this. In other words, temporal relationship is considered by ignoring other factors that plays an important role for cause and effect related events or phenomena, right? Cause effect related events are determined by temporal relations, spatial relations, economic, social, and you can mention other factors that plays an important role for cause and effect related happened phenomena. But post hoc ergo propter hoc occurs when it takes into consideration temporal relations as the sole factor by ignoring other factors, by neglecting other factors. Just one event happens immediately after the other event. Therefore, event A must be the cause for event B. Temporal relation is taken into consideration for 2 consecutively happened events. After observing several basketball games I attended this year, I noticed a pattern. Every time I purchased a good seat, our team won. Conversely, every time I bought a cheap, bad seat, we lost. Therefore, I conclude that my choice of seating somehow caused our team win or lose. This argument commits the fallacy of what? False cause, typically post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore this. Right? It tries to create a kind of imaginatively created events between 2 events which do not have any direct relation between them, but they are fictitiously created by the argument. Fictitiously created by the argument, right? Event A and event B are related only temporally, but the temporal relation is just one factor among many other factors, right? So post hoc is considering temporal relation, time relation between 2 events, as if the determinant factor for 2 consecutively happened events. For 2 consecutively happened events. I sneezed at the same time, the power went off. My sneeze did something to make the power go off. The football team lost last week, and now this week's pep rally is cancelled. I can't believe that the principal would do that. In reality, the pep rally was cancelled because of required standard test. Right? 2 events, event A and event B, are related temporally by ignoring other factors that plays an important role for 2 consecutively happened events. Something for the third and fourth example, right? Time relation is taken into consideration by neglecting other factors that plays an important role for 2 consecutively happened events. Non-causa pro causa not code for the cause, even time relation is ignored here. You cannot detect any relation at all between two consecutive events, but we imagined as if the first event is related to the second event in a causal relation, attributing the effect as the cause or vice versa, the cause as an effect, when in fact both events have some other common cause, like putting the horse before the cart. ጋሪውን ከፈረሱ ማስቀደም የሚባል አባባል ሰምታችሁ ታውቃላችሁ? ጋሪውን ከፈረሱ ማስቀደም. That typically applies to non-causa pro-causa fallacy. In other words, we are not aware of which one is the cause for the other. Just correlation is considered as causation. just ሁለት ነገሮች አንድ ላይ ስለተገኙ ብቻ አንዱ ለሌላው መንስኤ ነው ብሎ ማሰብ ማለት ነው። ሁለት ነገሮች አንድ ላይ ስለታዩ ወይም ስለተገኙ then we conclude that the first event is the cause for the third event. Or mismatching the cause and effect. One thing is presented as the cause of another, but the connection between the two is misunderstood, attributing the effect as the cause, incorrectly assuming the cause and effect between two phenomena that are actually both result of common cause. The term non-causa pro-causa is a concise way of referring to this fallacy, but it's not commonly known as non-causa fallacy. Look at the example. Putting more police on the street actually causes crime to increase. When we increase the number of cops or police on the beat on the street, the number of crimes witnessed by the police actually went up. What is the relation between increasing the number of police and increasing crimes rate? We imagine as if the first is related to the second in cause-effect relationship, when in fact both of them could have some other common cause. Correlation does not translate into causation. The argument claimed that the increase in the number of police officers on the street directly caused an increase in crime. However, this conclusion is based on misunderstanding of the correlation between police presence and reported crime. It's possible that the increased police presence led to a higher number of crime being observed and reported, rather than causing an actual increase in crime. The correlation between police presence and crime rate does not necessarily imply causal relation. Right? So non-causa typically relates to events as if the first event is related to the second event in causal connection just because they are correlated. They are simultaneously existed. Right? Simultaneous existence or correlations or combination of the events does not necessarily mean that the first event is the cause for the second event. Right? Second event or etc. Right? Same thing is for the second example. Right? Correlation does not necessarily mean causations. Fallacy of oversimplification occurs when an arguer intentionally selects a single factor and presents it as a sole cause or solution to a complex problem. This fallacy disregards the intricate, complex details and complexities that deserves consideration in comprehensive analysis. For example, the score on standardized tests have been dropping for several decades. What accounts for this? Well, during this same decade, the average time a child spends watching TV per day has increased. Therefore, the cause is obvious. Kids are watching too much TV when they need to be reading instead. Oversimplification is what? Presenting one factor for a particular problem by neglecting its detail that deserves attention. By neglecting other factors that plays an important role for a particular problem. We can think of other roles, factors that leads to the decline in standardized tests result. What would be the factors other than spending watching TV? What would be factors? Right? Pedagogical factor, isn't it? Economic factor. Teaching methodologies, technological advancement. You can think of other factors that leads to the decline in standardized test result. But the arguer selects only one factor and presents it as a sole factor. The score in standardized tests have been dropping for several years. Why? Because kids are spending too much of their time in watching TV. This is typically what? Oversimplification. It presents one factor and emphasizes as if it is the sole factor by neglecting details, by neglecting other factors that plays an important or even more important role other than the factors mentioned in the argument, right? Oversimplification is sometimes relevant, but it's considered fallacious when it neglects details that need to be addressed in the entire argument. Oversimplifications often occurs in various forms of media for the sake of brevity, clarity, or serve the particular political purpose. By reducing complex issues into simplistic explanation, the true complexity and depth of the subject matter can be overlooked, leading to an incomplete, misleading understanding of the problem at hand. It's important to recognize and critically evaluate this oversimplification to gain a more accurate understanding of the complex issues, right? Why people tend to commit the fallacy of oversimplification? It can be an error or it can be a trick. Oversimplification can be error. It can at the same time be a trick. When politicians, for example, the cause for African problem and backwardness is political. Because leaders are incapable of administrating democratically. This can be considered as oversimplification. Why? The cause for the backwardness problem of Africa is what? Multifaced. It is numerous. But the arguer presents political factor as if it's a sole factor for the entire problem of Africa by neglecting other details that deserves attention. Fallacy of oversimplification occurs when it selects a single factor and presents it as a sole factor for the problem, right? In various forms of media for the sake of brevity, clarity, or to serve a particular political purpose by reducing complex issues into simplistic explanations, right? Slippery slope is another version of false cause, but unlike false cause fallacy, in a slippery slope we have series of events in which the first event leads to the second event, second, third, and the fourth, and finally, undesired consequence. Undesired, unwanted, and dangerous consequence. Dangerous consequence, which is allegedly or fictitiously related to the first innocent event. The first innocent event. On slide number 43, you can find the example. Slippery slope fallacy. When an argument conclusion is based on the assumption of chain reaction of events without adequate justification for believing that the chain reaction will truly occur. In this fallacy, the arguer asserts that if one event happens, it will trigger a series of subsequent events that will lead to increasing negative or extreme outcome. There is insufficient evidence or reasoning provided to support the likelihood of this change or events actually unfolding. It's important to note that while causal relationship between events can exist and can be validly argued, the slippery slope, however, goes beyond that by making the unjustified claim about the sequence of events without strong basis. Right? First event relates to second event relates to third, and the last negative or dangerous outcome is related to the first innocent event by creating alleged chain reaction in between, right? Alleged chain reaction. Alleged, which is fictitious. Alleged means fictitious or not reasonably supported, right? But we imaginatively, fictitiously created between two events and assume as if the first event is the cause for the last event, right? The first is innocent event, and it must be the cause for the last dangerous consequence. Now look at the example. If we allow students to use smartphone in the classroom for educational purpose, it will lead to complete chaos. Now, the first imaginatively, fictitiously alleged created event. Then what? They will become addicted to their device, lose focus on their studies, and ultimately fail their exam. Therefore, we should ban smartphone altogether. Now, what is the relation between the failing exam and allowing smartphone in the classroom? Now, the first is an innocent event, which is controversial in its nature, and it's related to the last event, which is failure of the exam, by creating allegedly chain reaction in between them, which do not have any tangible, concrete occurrence or existence, but fictitiously exist in between in order to refute the original argument, right? In the example, the argument claims that allowing students to use smartphone in the classroom for educational purpose will lead to chain reaction of negative consequence. However, there is no sufficient reason provided to support the assertion that this chain reaction will actually occur. The argument assumes that the mere presence of smartphone will automatically lead to addiction, loss of focus, and academic failure without considering other factors such as implementation of proper guideline or potential benefit of using technology or in education, right? But it creates a kind of allegedly, fictitiously chain relation and assert as if the first innocent event is the cause for the last dangerous, unwanted consequence. Weak analogy occurs when? Argument based on analogy can be accepted when? Argument based on analogy, it's a type of inductive argument, right? It can be accepted as good inductive argument when? When the analogy is what? When the analogy between two events. Your name? Kalkidat, father name? Huh? Abar, yes. Stand up. Stand up. Turn left and right. Left and right. Left and right. Squat, squat. Come, squat. Yeah. Play. Circle. Come, come. Yeah. Ah, yes, yes. Circle. Come. Circle. Okay, take a seat, please. We need to have a habit of taking a break. Yes. Weak analogy. If the fallacy occurs when an argument relies on what? Irrelevant or weak comparison, or when there is a more appropriate disanalogy present. Weak analogy is often likened to the phrase comparing apple with orange. Comparing apple with orange. Of course, apple and orange are what? Both fruits. Both of them are fruit. But the fact that they are fruit is not sufficient. It's not adequate to compare them. Right? Why? Because apple and orange do have many dissimilarity. Dissimilarity or non-similar feature that outweighs their similarity. Right? That's why it derives its name as comparing apples with orange. We're two things that are fundamentally different. Or we can think of, we can come up with more dissimilarity or disanalogy than the similarity they share. Right? Weak analogy occurs when insufficient similarity is used to support the conclusion. or when more similarity is hidden, concealed. Right, the basic structure of argument based on analogy, as you can remember from the first chapter, entity A possesses attributes ABC, Z entity B possesses attributes ABC, therefore it's likely that entity B also possesses attributes C. However, the fallacy of weak analogy occurs when the analogy between A and entity B is not strong enough to support the conclusion. The conclusion could be due to what? Relevant differences between the entities that undermine the comparison being made. Right? It's also known as comparing apple with orange. More relevant, substantial comparison has been ignored, and superficial or irrelevant similarities has been mentioned to support the entire conclusion. Implementing strict gun control laws is like banning kitchen knife, because they can be used as a weapon. Just as we restrict access to dangerous objects like knives, we should restrict access to firearms. It's typically weak analogy, mentioning superficial evidence by neglecting or setting aside the most important evidence. Can turn on slide number 47. Slide number 47. You get slide? Slide number 47. You get slide? Stand up, please. Read this louder. Example number, question number 1.
No one has ever been able to prove the existence of extrasensory perception. Many evidence of that extrasensory perception is
Image. Very good. No one has ever been able to prove the existence of extrasensory perception. Therefore, we must conclude that extrasensory perception is a fiction. It does not exist. Which fallacy of weak induction is committed in this passage? And why? No one has able to prove the existence of extrasensory perception. We must conclude that extrasensory perception is a myth. Which fallacy of weak induction? And why? Appeal to unqualified authority, appeal to ignorance, false cause, non-causa, post hoc, slippery slope, weak analogy, castle. Appeal to ignorance. Why? Yes, correct. Because the promise asserts as if nothing has been proved, but the conclusion asserts as if it's proved, right? It's proved, yes. It's appeal to ignorance. Lester Brown, university educator, Cafiello. Read second example. Therefore, indicate that this is indeed a very serious problem. Yes. Which fallacy of weak induction is it? Is it fallacious or non-fallacious? Directly. Lester Brown is a geographer. The subject in question is about geography. It's about the tropical rainforest. So there is nothing wrong. It's what? Non-fallacious. Non-fallacious argument. Why? Because the authority is what? Relevant person to address issues related to tropical rainforest. He's a geographer, and the topic at hand is directly relevant to his or her qualification, right? But it can be potentially considered as appeal to unqualified authority. Why? Indirectly, it can be taken as unqualified authority, even though the person is qualified or he has the required ability or requisite skill to talk about the topic, the subject in question, but it may potentially indirectly be considered as unqualified. Why? He may have intention or motivation to disseminate misinformation, right? For an argument based on unqualified authority to occur, either one of these conditions can be existent: lack of qualification or lack of credibility, or lack of proper intention or motivation behind the argument being made, right? But directly the argument is not fallacious. Indirectly it can be potentially be considered as fallacious, right? A few minutes after Governor Smith, yes, Kibro, read it louder. A few minutes.
A few minutes after Governor Smith issued his speech on television, advertising restricts South America for the safety of the people out there. It's imperative that Governor Smith make no more speech.
Smith speech, yes. Which fallacy of weak induction is it? It is? Authority, unqualified authority. No. Post, false cause, which specifically which false cause? Oversimplification, post hoc, non-causal. Cause effect, yes. Which cause effect? Three of them have cause effect, right? But they are different in some subtly related. Two events are related in what manner? A few minutes after Governor Smith finished his speech on television, a devastating earthquake struck South America. For the safety of the people up there, it must be imperative that Governor Smith make no more his speech. It's false cause, specifically post hoc. Post hoc. Why? Because two events are related temporally. Temporally. Time related is considered and other factors are neglected. Two events, event A is related to event B just in time sequence. Time sequence, and we assume, we fictitiously believe that those two events are causally related, when in fact there is no real or genuine cause-effect relationship can be detected, right? It is post hoc ergo propter hoc, after this, therefore this. The prohibition of assault weapon after Kebrom, your name is? Stand up, please. The prohibition of? Tyrannical government. Very good. Nice reading. Which fallacy of weak induction? It's typically slippery slope, right? Series of events allegedly created, series of phenomena in which the first innocent event is supposed to create the last dangerous, unwanted event by creating allegedly created chain relation in between, right? It's typically slippery slope fallacy. It's a kind of false cause fallacy, but the events are more than two events, right? It's another version for slippery slope fallacy. Yes, the flow of electricity through conductors. Read it louder. Flow of stand up. Very good. Weak analogy. Thank you very much. Fallacies of presumptions refer to arguments that rely on assumptions that are usually not explicitly stated or back up with evidence. Fallacies of presumptions are like whispers in the dark, guiding the argument without ever appearing in the light, bringing them out in the open air, expose their lack of substance, beg the constant, complex questions, false dichotomy, suppressed evidence. They share something in common. They share something in common. They hide questionable evidence. They hide some controversial evidence and come up with some superficial evidence and conclude as if the original issue has been addressed, right? It's like a whisper in the dark, guiding the argument without ever appearing in the light. If the whisper were to expose in the light, it will expose their fallacious nature. Begging the question is also known as circular reasoning. Begging the question, the Latin term petitio principii, is by leaving out possibly false or shaky premise, or by restating possibly false premise as a conclusion, reasoning in a circle. For example, capital punishment is justified for the crime of murder because the state had the right to put someone to death for having intentionally killed someone else. It's typically begging the question because it circles rather than justifying. It repeats the premise in another phraseology. Now look at those expressions. Capital punishment is justified. Why? Because the state had the right to put someone to death for having intentionally killed someone. Is that the justification, or just simply a repetition? Right? It is just like justifying some controversial phenomena by some other controversial phrase or expression, which itself is open for criticism. Capital punishment is justified because the state had the right to put someone to death. Is circular reasoning. Circular reasoning. This example, the arguer assumed the conclusion capital punishment is justified by depending on a potentially false or questionable premise. The state had the right to put someone to death for murder. The arguments assume the legitimacy of capital punishment without providing evidence or addressing counter-argument against it. It begs, it circles, it repeats the question by using the conclusion as the premise, making the argument circular. Right? Something is true for the second argument. Women have the right, said the Bullfighter Association's president, but women should not fight bulls because the bullfighter is and should be a man. It's what? It circles. The arguer assumes the conclusion: women shouldn't fight bull by restating a potentially false or biased premise, right? So it typically either by reasoning in a circle or by missing out questionable premise. Look at the third word. Murder is morally wrong. This being the case, abortion must also be morally wrong. In this example, it's not about reasoning in a circle, but it is what? By leaving out questionable evidence. Who can tell me what is the missed premise in this argument? The missed premise that if it were present, it will lead to controversy. Murder is morally wrong. This being the case, then abortion must also be morally wrong. What is the missed premise or the hidden questionable premise? Whether what? Whether abortion is a murder, isn't it? Whether abortion is a murder. Murder is morally wrong. This being the case, abortion must also be morally wrong. This is what? Hides questionable premise. Whether abortion is a murder is not explicitly stated, but it assumes. It assumes, it conceals, or it hides. Because it were exposed into open daylight, the fallacious nature of the entire argument could have been exposed. Right? So begging the question occurred either because the premise reinstates or it repeats the conclusion, or by missing out questionable premise, by hiding questionable premise. If it were present, then it will expose the fallacious nature of the entire argument. Complex questions, is also known as loaded questions, occurs when the arguer asks a question that includes an unfair or unwarranted presuppositions. A loaded question is one that contains biased or questionable assumption. This type of argument is often intended to trap the respondent to acknowledging something that they may not want to admit. The fallacy of complex question is committed when a single question, which is essentially two or more questions, is asked and a single answer is then applied to both questions. Have you stopped beating your spouse? It is complex questions. Right? In this example, the question is loaded because it assumes that the person is being asked has been beating their spouse. By phrasing the question in this way, the argument is trying to trap the respondent to admitting that guilt without providing any evidence or allowing for alternative explanation. It put the respondent in a difficult position because any answer they give would be seen as an admission of guilt. Even if they have never engaged in such behavior, the question contains an unfair or unwarranted presuppositions. It presupposes something in mind, right? Exposing the presupposition, exposing the assumption will expose the fallacious nature of the entire argument. Have you stopped cheating on exam? The person who posed such kind of question do not have any information whether you cheated on exam or not, but he presuppose, and the answer you offer to his question can be directly changed into full-fledged argument. The purpose of posing such kind of question is what? Trapping the respondent in acknowledging something that he or she might not have want to admit that he or she has involved in that particular question that is being asked. Right? The aim is what? To trap, not allowing others to explain their ideas, but trapping the respondent into admitting without their disposition. Right? These are known as complex questions or loaded questions. Loaded questions because they can be translated. They are loaded, translated into full-fledged argument once the arguer trapped the audience, right? Trapped the audience. It does not allow us to speak your mind, but it just putting you into a narrow dichotomy of yes and no. False dichotomy, the fallacy of false dichotomy occurs when the argument attempts to manipulate by creating impression that there are only two choices available when in reality there could be a broader range of options. By framing the argument in this way, the arguer attempts to steer the audience towards a particular position by making it seem like the only viable or possible reasonable choice. This fallacy is also known as false dichotomy or false binary or black and white thinking or false bifurcation or denying conjuncts like either or fallacy. Fallacy of exhaustive hypothesis, fallacy of false choice, or fallacy of false alternative. Right? The fallacy of false dichotomy follows this general rule. Either claim X is true or claim Y is true, disregarding the possibility that both X and Y could be false. Claim Y is asserted to be false, therefore claim X is concluded to be true. Right? By neglecting the existence of possibilities other than the possibilities or the alternative presented. To the end justify the means creates black and white thinking, picture where achieving a good goal can only be done through bad means. Right? I have no choice often shuts down discussion about responsibility and potential alternative, while there may be constraint and pressures claiming complete helplessness, absolves oneself of any agency of creativity in finding other solutions. Right? It presents only two alternatives as if they are exhaustive alternatives or exhaustive choice by neglecting other alternatives or choice. Nature or nurture is false bifurcation or black and white thinking. You get what you pay for itself can be considered as false bifurcations. It presents two alternatives as if they are the sole alternative or option presented. By neglecting alternative in between. Suppressed evidence is related to argument based on cogent argument. Cogent argument can be considered as good inductive argument when premises are all true and the premises are strong, right? Strong plus true premise. But the condition of true premise can somehow be compromising sometimes. People may come up with true premise, but irrelevant or superficial premise. Even though they are true, they may not be relevant, substantial to support the conclusion, right? So the conclusion or the entire argument can be strong enough, but the mentioned premise are superficial. As the name implies, the substantial evidence is suppressed or cancelled or ignored or hidden from the general argument. Intentionally, arguer or writer, they tries to omit or suppress relevant evidence that could weaken or contradict their conclusion. This fallacy is often observed in manipulation of statistics. When arguers engage in suppressed evidence, they selectively present information that supports their viewpoint while disregarding or concealing evidence that might challenge or undermine their stance. By withholding crucial evidence, they create skewed or incomplete picture of the issue at hand, leading to a distorted understanding of the topic at hand, right? So as the name implies, suppressed evidence is a kind of inductive argument in which the most important or substantial evidence has been omitted or suppressed or concealed or hidden from the argument, right? It can occur in areas such as advertising, in politics or science, in everyday life. You can easily detect suppressed evidence when the arguer or when the writer tries to conceal, hide or suppress relevant evidence, come up with superficial evidence that tend to support their conclusion. A car company claims its model is the safest on the market, but only cites crash test results for a specific scenario while ignoring others where it performs poorly, right? With low supplement advertised for state in politics, science, everyday life, right? Suppressed evidence often involves cherry picking. What do you understand by this analogy? Cherry picking data, picking or selecting evidence that support your conclusion by ignoring or by suppressing, cancelling the most important evidence, the evidence, if it were present, that could have changed your evaluation of the entire argument, right? Suppressed evidence is very common in our everyday life. Cherry picking or selecting evidence that support one's argument, one's conclusion or one's positions, right? In politics or etc., etc. Suppressed evidence can be strong or it can be true, but it tends to ignore or set aside the most relevant evidence that if it were present, that could have changed the analysis, evaluation of the entire argument.